All right, once again, good evening, everybody. Good to see you. All right, so this past Shabbat, we were having discussions, and Alan told me that there was a lot more people who had questions. My guess is most of those people who had questions on Shabbat may not be here tonight, but I did say that if you wanted to, we would kind of continue on with that question and answers and discussion about some of those things that we talked about on Shabbat or from the Torah portion. So I'm still open to doing that. So if you do have comments, questions about this past week's message or the Torah portion, we'll get to that in just a moment. But I do want to share a couple things with you real quick that just been on my mind since very early this morning. In fact, since about 3:30 this morning. And I hope that I do not come across as someone who appears to sensationalize things. I do believe in being guided by the Spirit, and I hope that everybody who's been part of this congregation for any length of time understands what I mean by that, and how important I feel it is to be guided by the Spirit, because sometimes you can be right in the middle of what you think you're supposed to do, and then you sense that, well, no, I need to say this, or we need to do that, and you've been witness to that, and I do hope that you understand that I don't take that for granted, and I try to be very sensitive to that. So that being said, very early this morning, about 3:30, I was up and wasn't really thinking about, believe it or not, Jacob's tent. Wasn't thinking anything about Jacob's tent or anybody in Jacob's tent or anything to do with that. Actually, I was getting up to, sometimes you just get up in the middle of the night, you know? Okay, and we'll just leave it at that. But this just dropped down in my mind, my heart, my spirit, and it's kind of been with me all day long. And so I'm going to share this with you, a few thoughts. I'm going to read some scriptures and share a few thoughts with you. And I definitely see the connection to what we were talking about this past Shabbat, as it relates to the struggle that goes on as God is bringing you as an individual, us as a congregation, the body at large, into something that he's wanting to do, that there is a struggle. And particularly if the adversary may sense that a person, a family, a congregation, the body at large is posing a threat to whatever he's got going on. And so, I believe in this. There's things going on in the spiritual world. I don't go around, turning over every rock trying to find the boogeyman or anything like that. But I do believe that there is a spiritual world. And I believe that this morning that the Father dropped something in my heart that we need to hear. So in Deuteronomy chapter 8, by the way, if you have questions from this past Shabbat, kind of be getting those together and collecting your thoughts and what you wanted to ask. And the same is true for everybody who's joining us online. By the way, everybody, hello, all of you who are joining us online. But Deuteronomy chapter 8, verse 1. Every commandment which I command you today, you must be careful to observe, that you may live and multiply and go in and possess the land of which the Lord swore to your fathers. And so very simply put, if you want to live, if you want to multiply, and if you want to possess the land, and by that phrase, I've for a very long time translated that to mean to fulfill your purpose, to function in your purpose. Because Israel's purpose was not just to come out of the land of Egypt, was not just to go to Mount Sinai, it was not just to traverse the wilderness. All of those things were stepping stones that would lead them ultimately to possessing the land, where they would be literally seated at a table in the presence of their enemies. They would be literally a light in the midst of the darkness that surrounded them. And that's exactly the way the Creator orchestrated it, on purpose. That city that's set upon a hill is set upon a hill so that everybody can take note of it. The light is put upon the lampstand, not hidden under the bed, so that everybody can benefit from the light. Israel, when they were in Egypt, He put them in the midst of Egypt. They were a big red sore thumb from the perspective of Egypt, right in the middle of everything that was going on, so that when God set a distinction between Israel and between Egypt, everybody took note. So it's always been that way. And so to possess the land is, yes, they're going to go and literally inhabit the land. But in inhabiting the land and doing what they're supposed to be doing, they're functioning in their purpose, right? And we've talked about that all the time. And so the salt that is salty is functioning in its purpose. But the salt that has lost its saltiness, what happens to it? It's tossed out into the street because it's not doing anything. It's good for nothing, Messiah says. So again, if you want to possess the land, that is, if you want to function in your purpose, if you want to do what God has placed you here to do, be very careful to observe. By the way, that word would also be to guard. Be very, very attentive to these things that you have been commanded, so that you'll live, so that you'll multiply, and then that you'll, I'll put it this way, function in your purpose. Now remember that the Lord your God led you all the way these 40 years in the wilderness to humble you. John talked to us a great deal last week about humility and how important it is. We know that. We know how important humility is. Yet, knowing how important it is and then walking it out, two different things, right? Why? Because we're still in this corrupt flesh. And so that is, going to be a struggle until corruption puts on incorruption. But anyway, he says he humbled you, and he did that to test you, to prove you, to put you in a situation to see exactly what you would do, to know what was in your heart. Now, they had expressed at the foot of Mount Sinai, when God is speaking in this thundering voice, I'm the Lord your God who brought you up out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You're to have no other gods before me, no graven images of anything in the earth, of the heavens, of the seas. And they were motivated to say, everything the Lord says we will hear and we will do. So they expressed it with their mouths, but he is basically saying, I want to see what's in your heart. What's really in there? And so he put you in a situation to humble you. And it occurs to me that it is not our nature to humble ourselves without provocation. This side? It's not our inclination to just, I think I'll walk in humility today. Right? We usually need a little urging. We need a little push. We need a little something to, you need to walk in humility today. And usually that doesn't jive with our flesh. And that's basically what he's saying. I did this, or the Lord your God did this to you, to humble you, to test you, to find out what was in your heart and whether or not you would keep his commandments. And so he humbled you. He allowed you to hunger. He let you feel the pangs of hunger. And then he fed you with manna, which you did not know, nor did your fathers know, that he might make you know. He did all that so you'd come to this conclusion, that man shall not live by bread alone, but man lives by every word that proceeds from the mouth of the Lord. So as I'm, this is just kind of in an instant in my heart and my mind, and I'm pondering this, and, how many times have I been placed in a situation where I felt like he had to humble me to know what was really inside there? And usually it has come through a very stressful situation, sometimes self-imposed, sometimes things I didn't have anything to do with, but in a very stressful situation so that he really gets to see what's on the inside, and that I really get to see what's on the inside too. So that I would come to the conclusion that the most important thing is not what our flesh considers to be the most important thing, but the most important thing is every word that proceeds from his mouth, because his words are life. And that's how we live. That is how we multiply. And that is how we possess the land. That's how we function in our purpose. And so the next thought was this: 40 years in the wilderness. 38 of those years were not intended at the beginning. 38 of those years came as a consequence of what? Disobedience that was provoked by an evil report. An evil report. So the people received an evil report. God said one thing, men said another. And so there came this evil report. You know the story. We don't have to go back through all the details of it, but let's just kind of quickly take note of the fact that when men heard an evil report, received an evil report, what did they go and do? They went into their tents and began to do this. Start doing this kind of stuff. Now, somehow or another, they convinced themselves that if we go into our tents and we do this, nobody will know. And how they thought that God wouldn't hear is beyond me. And yet, we get in our flesh, don't we? And we think that, well, if I'm doing it, there must be a good reason. I'll get off of that. My main point here is the people believed an evil report. And that is what caused them to wander an additional 38 years. But have you ever thought about this? Joshua had to wander 38 more years. Caleb had to wander another 38 years. Moses had to wander another 38 years, right along with the people who did all of this. So remember what I said last week, that Esau, this is what he uses, this mouth. Here's why I'm telling you this as your pastor, your shepherd, whatever word works for you. This is what Esau's doing. He's hissing with his teeth, and he's running his mouth. I'm not talking about just here. I'm just talking about at large, okay? But because he's doing it at large, it also has effect on us. So we lost the lights out here. I don't know if y'all are aware of that back there, but we're not going to be watching a movie, so as soon as you can, turn them back on. Okay? Because I want to see these people's faces. But that is what's going on. And as I said at the very beginning, I believe that there is a spiritual world at war, and you and I get caught up in that. We're kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? We don't see a lot of things, but we can see its effects here. It's kind of like when Messiah was talking to Nicodemus about the Spirit of God, and how he likened it to the wind. You don't know where the wind's coming from, but you can see its effects. You can't grab it and hold it and keep it, but you can see its effects. So that's what I'm sensing. I'm seeing the effects. I'm watching and seeing how things are kind of taking shape. And so I want us to remember that all of us, me, Beth, you, everybody in this congregation, other congregations, other people that we've spoken to, other congregations that we've spoken to, today, people that I've spoken to, it's some of the things that are going on that they're going through, they're having to deal with. I'm telling you, for whatever reason, God's people are being placed in a situation, not just here, but including here. God's people being placed in a situation to see what's really in our hearts, which then leads me to believe that there's something on the other side of this. Something that's on the other side of this that the adversary does not want to see come to pass. Do you believe that? I believe it with my whole heart. I believe it with everything that's within me. And again, I hope that doesn't come across as just, sensationalism or anything like that. I'm not the sharpest knife in the drawer. I realize that. I know that there are people who can teach circles around me. I know that there are people who can quote scripture. Hey, show me. Boom, 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 scripture after scripture after scripture. I can't do that, But I know what I know, and I'm sensing very strongly that God's people are being placed in a situation to test us to see what is really in our hearts, to see if we truly are going to do what he's called us to do. And remember, 38 years, it wasn't just the guilty people who had to wander through the wilderness. It was the people who weren't guilty of these things. So then, let us just determine and resolve within ourselves that we'll be Joshua, we'll be Caleb, we'll be the people who will not believe the evil report and who will say that we can do what God has called us to do, regardless of what Esau is doing right now. And he's running his mouth. He's doing this stuff here. He's hissing, okay? So some of you might think, well, that's a little weird, Bill. Hadn't heard that in a long time. That's South Georgia talk. Bill. It's got 2 syllables. Anyway, I hope you're hearing my heart. I'm telling you, I know what I know. And you can take it or leave it. But the evil report can't be trusted. Okay? Keep your eyes on him, not on me. Keep your eyes on him, not on that guy, not on that person. Keep your eyes on him. Okay? Now, with that, does anybody have something that they would like to share, maybe related to what I just now said, or perhaps something that goes back to this past weekend when we were talking about it? Now, if you don't, this is going to be a very short service, because I left it with you that anybody had questions about that can continue on. But I do know that there were a lot of people, and John, I'm going to let you do this if anybody does have anything they want to share. If not, I'll just kind of keep talking about some things. I know a lot of people are asking, it's like, so Bill, are you saying that the spirit of Esau would bless Jacob and give him that new name? No, I didn't say that. In fact, Stephen, I thought more and more about what you guys were talking about, and more it makes sense to me that even the adversary is going to have to acknowledge that God's people are blessed. Even the adversary is going to have to acknowledge that God's people, Israel, how lovely are your tents, these kinds of things. And so, no, I don't believe that the spirit of Esau blessed or pronounced the blessing or gave that name, if that's what he was contending with. But I do believe that the adversary is going to have to acknowledge that when God's people humble themselves, that the adversary, who is the accuser of the brethren, is not going to find anything in them. When Yeshua was about to go to the greatest trial anybody's ever had to endure, do you remember what he said? Well, first of all, he asked his disciples to do what? To watch and to pray. To be on guard and to be in prayer. Now, what did he find them doing? So they didn't really take what he said to heart, did they? But finally, he said, well, you know what? It's okay. The prince of this world is coming, and he has nothing in me. Man, I want to be that guy, that he has nothing in me. I don't want us to be a congregation that he has anything to lob accusations at us with. I want it to be that when the Father looks upon this tent, that he sees there's no guile. Right? All right, so where are we at? All right, Jeff?
Pastor Bill, so when the children of Israel crossed over the Jordan, the scripture says, we don't war against flesh and blood, but against powers and principalities. But God specifically told Joshua and the leaders, this city, wipe out everybody, every animal, man, woman, child, that city too. So in that spiritual battle, where scripture says, I'm not going to give you the land all at once. You're going to have to fight for it and strengthen yourselves. How do we balance, let's say, wrestling or fighting against principalities and powers in the spirit? And then how do we deal with that evil?
We stand against it. We resist it. I think everybody has struggled with this at one time or the other, because our main and primary adversary is not the flesh and blood. However, flesh and blood gives itself over to these entities and these spirits and these inclinations. And we do find ourselves in a situation where we have to combat human beings. I guess for me, the way I have resolved it for me is to realize that that person is opposing me, but they are really not my enemy. Okay? Now, I'm not going to, when I'm in warfare, so to speak, I'm not going to just lay down and let that person who's being influenced by the enemy to have his way. I'm going to resist. I might do it nicely, initially. But then there comes a time, I've had all I can stands and I can't stands no more, and I'm going to take a stand. And I think Paul even addresses that too. When you've done all you can do to stand, stand. And what does that imply? That there are things that the adversary is going to try to do, yes, through people that we are to stand against. There are going to be situations that we have to make judgments and that we have to turn some people over to the adversary for the saving of their soul. Right? So he's not, even in that kind of a dramatic situation, he's not identifying that person as the enemy, but he is acknowledging that this person is being used by the enemy, and since they're being used by the enemy, that person shouldn't still be in your congregation, right? There are some admonitions that come from Paul who says we're not warring against flesh and blood. There are some admonitions that come from him. There are certain situations of people that you're not to break bread with them. You're to turn away from them, right? Now, what is he? Is he talking out of both sides of his mouth? I don't think so. Our primary enemy is our adversary, the adversary of our soul. Sometimes that adversary is the guy we see in the mirror, all right? But then there are those times that we're going to have to face the adversary that is working in and through people. And that is probably going to be one of the ways, Jeff, that the Father finds out what's in our heart. I know that's how it is with me. Because you can find out real fast what's in my heart if you start messing with my kids. Right? So anyway, I'm sure we'll be debating that one till the kingdom. But, that's kind of how I've left it with myself. I'm going to have to contend with people. I'm going to have to war with people. I just try not to make that person to be my enemy. Because my enemy needs to be destroyed. Okay? Yes, ma'am.
Yeah, I'd like to touch on about 3 different things from the Shabbat. Fast forwarding into Genesis chapter 48, where that Isaac was blessing, or Israel was blessing Joseph's 2 sons. I'm in chapter 48, verse 16. And he says, "The angel which redeemed me from all evil, bless the lads, and let my name be named on them in the name of my fathers Abraham and Isaac." And my Bible is saying that this is the first mention of the Goel in the Bible. So the man that, we were debating or talking about what was it, who was it?
We were discussing.
Discussing, that's right, discussing, midrashing, whatever we were doing.
Having a friendly discussion.
Right. So could this be maybe what he is referencing to when he says the angel which redeemed me from all evil? He's calling, almost like he's asking for that angel to bless the lads and give them the same name that he received.
Let me back up. When we were talking about all this last week, I hope I said this. I thought I had, but if I didn't, I want to make it very clear. To say that he was struggling with, something that was evil in the person, I'm not going to be dogmatic about that. I was just bringing into that there is this line of thinking that comes from Judaism, that this was this spirit. And what I wanted to do is, let's just say for the sake of the argument that maybe that's what it was. What can we glean from that? And some of the things that we can glean from that is that the adversary is going to oppose us. He is going to try to stop what God is doing in our lives. And if we're going to overcome the adversary, when we're struggling with God, so to speak, we're going to have to hold on and work through that process. So, I mean, that's a very boiled down version. All right, that being said, this angel that's referred to here, I don't have my Hebrew Bible in front of me. Does anybody have, Stephen, you have yours? Check that word out and see if it's malach, just to make certain. But yeah, it could be. But also remember, there were angels that greeted him after he had the encounter with Lavan, and he was about to enter into the land. In fact, there was multiple angels in that, right? So there's, but it could be that this angel this man, whatever it was, that might be what he's referring to.
Okay, and that you mentioned about the angels, the host of angels, that was another point I wanted to bring up in chapter 32 about how that verses 1 and 2 is talking about that host of angels. And then in verse 3, it says, and Jacob sent messengers, which isn't that the same?
It is the same word.
Hebrew word for angels. So could it be possible that he was sending some angels over to Esau?
If you read Jewish commentary, that's exactly what they say.
Is that right? Okay.
That's what they say.
Yeah.
That's not what I'm saying. That's what they say.
Well, anyway, that just kind of like stood out to me, because later on it was in the chapter is talking about how he sent servants to go deliver the gifts. But here he's saying he sent messengers. So then that brings up my question.
Well, just let me make this point. Malach is the Hebrew word that is used here in the passage that you were reading from Genesis 48. And malachim is what would be translated as messengers or angels. So this is where context is king. And this is why we get, sometimes we get, diverging schools of thought about what's actually being stated here, which kind of goes back to, why we said last week, this is one school of thought that this was somehow the Messiah, before he walked the earth. Or there's another school of thought that says it's this. Either way, we end up in a situation where Jacob is having to struggle if he's going to become Israel. All right, so I'm sorry, go ahead.
Okay. So brings up my question. If he sent some of these angels to go before him to meet Esau, a question that I have is, are we as children of God, as his people, born-again believers, do we have that authority to pray or to commission angels to go, say, do a work or minister to somebody, or I'm trying to say.
I do.
I mean, how do you feel about that? Do you feel like
I'm gonna tell you that I don't know for sure. Okay, because I'm not one of those who's seen angels a lot. In fact, I've never seen one that I know of. I know that the Bible tells us that we can entertain angels unawares. Maybe that's happened. I don't know. I'm not a person who sees angels all the time, and I guess I'm exaggerating a little bit. And so I'm not going to be the kind of person, I want this angel to go do this and this angel to do that. I think that's quite presumptuous, quite frankly. However, I will relate this story to you, and you can take it for what it's worth. Beth and I were living in Fort Myers, Florida, and this is 92, so 30 years ago. And where we were living was a war zone. We were living in the parsonage next to this small church where we were the youth and music pastors there. And I mean, when I say a war zone, I'm not exaggerating. There were drug deals, shootouts, everything you can imagine going on right out the front. In fact, our son Nathan, who was just a little guy at the time, was standing in front of this plate glass window that faced the main street, and the police were chasing somebody. He collided into a car out in front, got out. There was gunshots, everything's going on, and Nathan's standing right in front of the window. A friend of ours dove over grabbed him to get him on the ground. So this kind of thing was going on all the time. I would walk outside to go to the church, and there would be people waiting to see somebody come out that door and would try to come immediately into the door to go into where Beth and the kids were, two small kids at the time. It was a very, very, very unsettling situation. Before it all ended, I was staying up till 3 and 4 or 5 o'clock in the morning, just keeping watch all morning to make sure that nobody messed with my family, and then I'd go to sleep for a few hours. So there was some things that were happening in that situation, and one night Beth and I were sitting in the living room, and we were very distraught about what to do. And while we were sitting there on the couch, something walked into the room. She's not out here to verify this, but something walked into the room. It's like when somebody walks up behind you, you sense it, right? This wasn't somebody coming up behind. This was somebody, it's like they walked into the main room where we were and were just standing there. This has never happened before or since. But I felt then that God had sent a messenger. Didn't see anything, mind you. But God had sent a messenger to help us. And I just prayed. And I said, I feel like this messenger is supposed to go before us and to go before us and clear the path for us so that we can get out of this situation. Next day, I get a phone call from another gentleman who offered us a position in another church, and we got out of that place. So you can make of that what you will. I'm not going to, that's not something I'm going to do every day. But I know what happened then. Okay. And I'm not exaggerating anything. There wasn't anything beyond what I just described to you. But immediately the next day, some things began to change. So if I were going to be pinned to the mat and say, does that happen? I'd say, yeah. Does it happen every day? Not in my life. I think a lot of times, we are put in situations just to see what we are going to do, how we are going to respond, how long are we going to trust, how long are we going to hold on. But then, there are those times that God sends ministering spirits to give us encouragement. Daniel prayed for 3 weeks. He prayed, waiting for an answer. And he got, the angel showed up, talked to him. That's never happened to me before. It would kind of freak me out if that happened. I have to be honest with you. But he said, look, God heard you the first day you prayed. You remember where this is. And he describes this battle that is going on that men can't see. In fact, at one point he told him, God heard your prayer. Here's what the answer is, but I got to hurry because the prince of Persia is coming. So there was this other principality that was at work. So there are things that go on that we can't see, no doubt. I'm just one of those that is very careful to make sure that I'm not going around looking for a boogeyman under every rock and not everything is angels and spirits and all these kinds of things. Okay?
Well, I know that the Word of God says that the angels of God encamp around about those that fear Him. And I believe that there are angels that we're not even aware of and that we don't see. And I'll just briefly share, you shared a story, I'll share a little story. I had an encounter with what I believe was an angel I didn't see, but heard. And this was years ago when we were in this church, and there was maybe about 5 or 6 of us sisters decided to go to the church to pray. It was a big tabernacle thing. And we locked the door because it was in the country. We locked the door and we went in and we all got in a different spot. And I remember I got on the platform and covered myself up. And we all prayed out loud and we all prayed at one time. Everybody was praying. We all were praying. And all of a sudden, I heard this voice pray louder than any of the other voices. And I lifted up my head and I looked around. I thought, who came in? And I couldn't figure it out. So but it was praying. Brother Bill, I can't even describe to you. It was interceding. It was praying. And so I just went on, and after everybody got done praying, we started questioning one another. Who came in? They heard. Everybody heard it. The ones that were in the back heard the voice in the front. The ones that were in the front heard the voice. We were hearing it from all different areas. And I'm persuaded to this day that God sent an angel in amongst us to pray. And it wasn't too long after that church went through some really, really hard battles and eventually broke up. And I believe that God had sent an angel interceding for us that night. I really do.
Why do you think that I concluded my message this past Shabbat by reminding us of the passage where Elisha tells his servant, he says, Lord, open his eyes so he can see that there are more who are with us than they that are with them.
Yes.
Because I do believe that the angel of the Lord encamps round about them that fear him, and he delivers them.
Yes.
So yeah, I believe that. And that, I guess, is one of the reasons that I kind of started things off the way I did tonight. Because I believe that there's a war going on that we can't see, but we can sense the effects of it down here. We can see the evidence. It's just like the wind blowing, You don't know where it comes from, but you can see how it moves things. You can see how it affects things. And I know that probably some people are kind of getting weirded out right now. But it is what it is, But yeah, I believe that there are, what was that old song we used to sing? And there are angels all around. I believe that. I do.
I'll finish with this. I'll shut up because I know other people have things to say. But with that subject of angels, what does this scripture always baffled me in chapter 11 of 1 Corinthians about King James words it, for this calls off the woman to have power on her head because of the angels. And it's talking about the order, Christ being the head of the man being the head of the woman. That's what that whole chapter about a man praying and prophesying.
That's not one I'm going to be able to answer on the fly.
Okay.
All right.
Yeah,
I am actually working on right now, sometime after the first of the year, I want to start going through Paul's letter by letter.
Wonderful.
And start teaching on some of those things.
Yeah.
So just want you to hit the pause button on that question.
Okay. I'll bring it up and remind you later.
I know you will. I'm sure you will. All right. Who else has something they want to ask or share? Yes, sir.
I wanted to tag on to what Jeff was asking about, and you made it quite well about standing against evil. Mm-hmm. And it brings me to Ephesians chapter 6. We all know it, but we're starting a young adult group, and that's what we're going to be studying, is putting on the whole armor of God.
Okay.
Standing up against evil. And, in verse 10, I believe verse 11 is what you described, so you can able to stand against the wiles of the devil. And that's what we kind of have to do, is put on the armor of God and really stand up. And Joshua made it pretty clear when he had to fight. There was, they had people coming in front, coming in behind, and they made it clear, you got to be, we have to be like men, and it's for us men, and stand up and fight against that evil. We have to stand up. You made it very clear about that. I'm like, yeah, that's the answer. Standing up against it and having truth, righteousness, faith, and salvation. More than that, but yeah. We got to have all of that. We got to have the whole armor of God.
Well, he precedes it in verse 10 by saying, be strong in the Lord and in the power of his
Yes. Yes.
might, not our own.
Exactly.
Right?
Not our own. Not our own.
Okay. So you just want to make that comment?
I just wanted to tag on
All
to
right.
that.
Well, that's a good exclamation point. Thank you. All right. Anybody else have anything they want to share? Yes, ma'am.
Hi, Bill. This is just, I'm not sure it's from last week's Torah portion, but, pardon me, it's astounding to me how whatever Torah portion we're studying, it just parallels so closely with what's going on in everybody's life.
It's
Different
almost
stories.
like somebody designed it that way.
Right. I know. I love it. I love it. One thing, what I wanted to share was like over these past years, these past few weeks, and we've been talking about Isaac and Rebecca and the twins and all the things that went on, all the deceptions that went on, and it just kind of struck me how, because these are our patriarchs and our matriarchs, that we don't give them. I don't hear, at least, that we give them the latitude to be perfectly human, imperfectly human, and have failings, maybe because they are patriarchs and matriarchs. I don't know. But the thing that stood out to me, too, is that, again, this is what I hear. It's like, can you believe that they did that? Can you believe, and how disappointing that might be to some people? But I don't hear about the desperation when these so-called deceptions were taking place. There were some important, desperate issues at hand. You know, Rebecca, I think she knew that the nation of Israel was going to be birthed. I mean, she kept those things in her heart, and she must have known, you know, that, I mean, because people get desperate, they will do all kinds of things. You know, righteous men will steal food for their family. You know, if people get desperate enough, all kinds of things might take place. But I don't know that. I guess I just wanted to make that point because there was a lot at stake every time there was deception. What we want to call deception. There was a lot at stake each time.
Which, first of all, let me say that I am very much in touch with the idea that these were imperfect people, you know, which gives me hope to know that they were very imperfect, you know. In fact, I am very much of the opinion that God has never chosen a perfect person because there's no perfect person to choose, you know. There's only one who's been perfect, and the sins of the world were laid upon his shoulders, but there's none righteous, no, not one. So I am very, what's the word? That gives me hope, like I said. I take heart in the fact that all these people, these patriarchs and these matriarchs, were just human beings like us, and they go through stuff. And one of the reasons that all these things were written down is so that we would learn from their victories and from their defeats. We would learn things to do, learn things don't do. And through all of that, to see that in spite of their desperation, perhaps their bad choices, sometimes their great choices, all of, you know, the whole big thing, without God, none of it happens. You know, Israel is a story of how time after time after time after time after time, God has to intervene. You know, Sarah's barren. She's past the age. She gets pregnant. Rebecca, she's barren. She gets pregnant. You know, Esau's poised to crush Jacob's head, but somehow another little infant gets his hand on that other guy's heel. And on and on and on and on. And so there's always this divine intervention that if we're not paying attention, we can gloss right over it and realize, no, that was God. That's got his fingerprint on it. There's his fingerprint there. And so I say that to say this. I look at my life, and if I were to just give you my whole life story, you would see a whole bunch of stupid, okay? But you would also see, if you were paying attention, that every once in a while God put his fingerprint there. And he changed, and he altered the trajectory of things. Or sometimes when I was just hell-bent on doing the wrong thing, he'd set up a big roadblock and say, you're not getting past me. All these kinds of things. So desperation, can cause people to do stupid stuff. But desperation can also cause a guy to hold on and not let go until he's transformed, And that's where we need to be right now, every one of us. There is a sense of desperation. We're living in a really, really bad time. We're living in very dangerous times. Paul called it perilous times. I believe we're right in the middle of that. And if we stand in our own power and might, if we're not wearing this armor, desperation could cause us to do stupid. All right? But desperation can also chase us to God and to grab hold of him and not let go. And that's, I know this sounds weird, but I think that's just kind of where we need to be right now. Because everything, according to Hebrews 12, is going to get shaken. Everything. Everything you believe in, everything I believe in, everything we've placed our confidence and our trust in, everything is going to get shaken. And the only thing that's going to be left is what is built on what's solid and what is worthy to stand. So, gird your loins.
Can I just say, he shows up and shows off and takes all the credit?
Yes, you can say that. He shows up, shows off, and he takes all the credit. And because he deserves all the credit, because we do stupid. Right? All right. Who has the microphone? Yes, sir.
So it's back to, of course, with what we talked about on Shabbat.
Okay.
2 comments and a question. For whenever they crossed the Jabbok River, and he stayed on the other side, I looked up what Jabbok meant, and it says it meant emptying. And I thought it was interesting how everything that belonged to him, he sent it over. So like he was being emptied of everything that defined him, and all that was left was him. And that's what God wants. God wants, he has all that pertains to us, but he also wants just us. And everyone shared of who they feel or believe or think that might be the person he wrestled with. When reading it, in my perspective, what I was looking at was, I kept picturing it being Yeshua, and I know because we've been binge watching The Chosen, I keep picturing that guy that plays Yeshua on there. But whenever I pictured them wrestling and that whole interaction and just holding on to him. And something that's been coming up a lot too is holding on to his promises. And it's like, I'm just holding on to him. He's like, hey, day's coming. You have to let me go. He's like, no, I'm not letting you go. I'm not letting go of those promises that you've made to me. And said, what's your name? And he blesses him, Israel. And he says, and then when he asks, what's your name? He's like, why do you ask my name? It's kind of like, you know me. Why do you ask my name? And so that's just something that's running through my head, of just holding on to those promises that, we get rewarded for holding on to the promises that he's made to us.
I just can't see that guy that's in The Chosen in a wrestling match.
Yeah. I more saw him afterwards whenever they're having the conversation, not so much the wrestling part. But so those are my comments. And my question was, with Esau, Jacob and Esau have that whole interaction, and Jacob gives him like a bunch of stuff, and that appeases him. Later on, Isaac dies, and after he's dead, it says that Jacob and Esau, they couldn't live in the same land because both of them owned so much, and so they had to leave. Esau left and went to another place, and part of me wonders if Esau was so hell-bent on getting... I'm sorry, I don't know if that's a good term to use.
It's out there now, pal.
My bad.
No, you're good. You're good. You're good.
If he was so determined to...
I'm going to go with the first one.
Okay.
Can't edit live.
Yeah, that's true. If he was so determined for that, then why is it that he didn't just get rid of Jacob right there? Why is it that Esau left? I would have pictured Esau being like, hey, this is where I want to be. I'm staying here. You get out. And so that was just something that was interesting to me, how he did leave. And I don't know, maybe it's just that God was like,
no, I want Jacob here, you leave. And so he kind of just motivated him to leave. But I don't know if you have thoughts or insight.
Well, I mean, the Bible is very clear that there's an area that God had deemed that's Esau's land, that's Edom's. And in fact, when they're coming back up out of Egypt and they're coming through the land of Edom, he tells them, do not harass Edom. Don't try to take any of their land, not even 1 foot. I'm not going to give it to you. That's what's been deeded to him. So there's that. But 2, while Jacob was in the land, he was still sojourning in the land. You know, until Isaac died, he was still a sojourner. So it's not like they had actually taken possession of the land. They were living in it, yeah, but they hadn't taken possession of the land. That whole thing with Shechem and Dinah and everything that happened there, you know, that's evidence that, you know, the Canaanites were still in the land. They more or less possessed the land. Jacob was still a sojourner. So perhaps that comes into play as well, and maybe that's in part anyhow. Why Esau feels like, well, you know, I'm going to go over here. But then there's this possibility as well. You know what? God can, how do I want to say this? God can get his way. You know? He can orchestrate things and influence things and put it in people's hearts to do certain things or not to do certain things. I mean, Laban was coming to kill Jacob. That seems pretty clear. God shows up in a dream and says, you touch him, I'll kill you. That changed his mind. Right? You know, Abimelech took Sarah in and was going to make her one of his wives. God showed up in a dream and said, you touch her, I'll kill you. So God can have his way. God gets his way. So that might be, you know, something to consider too. Yeah, I mean, you know, they were both so wealthy, apparently, you know. There wasn't room for them in this, and so maybe that's what provoked Edom to just go where he went. It could be just as simple as that. But I think other things come to play.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
All right. Yes, sir.
You should have said, excuse me, should have said, I'll never leave you or forsake you. And in, gotta put my eyes on. In chapter 28, when God is telling him that, behold, I am with you and will keep you wherever you go and will bring you back into the land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have promised. In other words, if God is with him there, how can you be defeated in a wrestling match? I mean, the man, whoever it is, he can't be defeated. So, I mean, God was giving him the strength through all that to persevere that.
There's the promise, and, you know, and this is how I've always kind of wrestled with this, the same verse, you know. As he's going out, he just made that promise to him. I'm going to bring all these things to pass. I'm going to bring you back into this land. And yet, it's that report that evil report that he gets that caused him to fear, right? Right. So what happens when we, you know, get the evil report and we give in to fear, even though God's already said these things beforehand? I don't know that I would have acted any differently, you know, in the sense of I would have been concerned, you know, and even though I know that God promised this to me. In fact, you read his prayer, you know, on the night that he's, you know, sending everybody across and he's by himself. He's basically praying, you said you would do this. Now, are you going to do this? And I mean, that seems to be his prayer. So I guess what I'm trying to say, Jerry, just kind of putting myself in the situation, I wouldn't have known the strength that God can give me unless I actually had to be in the struggle. I could hear him say that, But I wouldn't really know that he's given me the strength to do something until I'm in that situation and I got to go through that struggle. And I've heard, so many times the different people who are going through some awful, awful situations. And you wonder from afar, how in the world can they possibly hold up? And very often they'll say, well, God's just giving me the strength to do this. It's not, I don't know how it's happening, but God's giving me the strength to do this. So I think it's, that what you said is true. But unless we actually have to, get tangled up in the struggle, so to speak, maybe we wouldn't realize that. Maybe we wouldn't really see that and know that we know. Yeah.
You brought up something fascinating, the evil report. Steve and I were talking this afternoon about making decisions out of fear. And I know oftentimes over the news over the last 5, 6, 7 years, whether it be blood moons or whatever's in the news, I know I personally have made fear-based decisions and have probably slowed forward movement down.
So are you saying you still have some Y2K food somewhere? I'm just playing.
I know. Actually, I do. Actually, that was before me. I have blood moon food.
Okay.
But yeah, when we made the move here, I wanted to make faith-based decisions, not fear-based anymore. And when you said that, the evil report, it really made me think inwardly just now, just wow. We all do that. We all make decisions based on evil reports. Whether that evil report could be on Fox News or whatever, Epic Times for that matter. But I think when we make decisions based out of fear, it's based on an evil report.
Well, let's keep this in mind as well. An evil report may not be an inaccurate report. It may be a very accurate report because there were giants, there were fortified cities. What made it evil was that hearing that news caused people to lose sight of what God had already said and not willing to go on with what God had said, which then in my mind connects to the whole idea of Jacob holding on and not letting go. Because if he lets go, does he become Israel? If he lets go, does he become Israel? So his descendants, what they're going to do is they're going to hear the evil report, which was an accurate report in terms of what they had to face in the land. But it was a report that they decided meant that we can't do what God has called us to do, and so we're going to let go. So let's keep that in mind. An evil report can be an accurate report. But if it causes you to run away or let go from what God has called you to do, then we run the risk of not doing or not functioning in our purpose, or salt that loses its saltiness. Hey, Mama. She's all right, unless you just don't want her to get all nasty and everything. So if she does it, well, you know what? That's fine. Anyway. All right. Anyway, I'm sorry, Michael. Was there something else you wanted to say? All right. Thank you. All right. Who's next? Who has the microphone? Jeff, how are you doing, sir? Are y'all having an argument? There's like 3 seats between you.
We'll soon find out.
No, Lena's just crawling around. She's
standing. Look at her.
Oh, she's walking now.
Is she walking
She's
now?
walking, yeah.
All right.
Yeah, so our hands
checking
are
me out. I don't know if I like that guy.
Our hands are full, yeah.
Yeah.
No, I've been actually debating asking for the microphone tonight. Several things with angels and should we stand up against the enemies? How do you discern the difference between, blessing our enemies and striking down our enemies and anyway, and now faithfulness and God's bringing you through situations and you got to hold on tight. And I have a story. It was when he started bringing me and opened my eyes to the Torah and Sabbath and the feasts. And during that time for me, I was engaged to a woman, and I started, seeing some things that Yeshua wasn't born on December 25th, and so on and so forth, and started questioning these things, bringing this up to this woman, and she thought I was crazy and wanted nothing to do with it, and so we went our separate ways. And the night that we decided the wedding was off, I was just so much emotional pain and turmoil, and I was mad at God, and why is this costing me my relationship? I'm not going to deny these truths that you're showing me, and I want to be honor you and not compromise on my values, but why is it costing me this relationship? And I went out for a walk. It was like 10 or 11 at night, and I was very just anguish and pain and anger. And I lived in Alexandria, just outside of DC. It was a very busy road, even at night. And I decided while I was out for my walk that I was going to jump in front of a car and just end my life. I was ready to be done. And after I made that decision in my mind, this is what I'm going to do. The next car that comes down, I'll jump in front of. And there was cars as I was walking. And then as soon as I made that decision in my head, there wasn't a single car that went down that road. And I waited. And I walked and I paced, and I was like, seriously? And so I went home, and now I'm kind of like ashamed, and it was just this experience. And so I went home, and I was so exhausted, I passed out. I just fell face first onto my bed, and I woke up at like 5 a.m, didn't even set an alarm, and I had work in the morning too. Woke up to a voice in my room. Don't know if it was an angel or what, but there was a voice. And it said, God is faithful. And it was the most peaceful, serene, it was like this blanket was just being put over me, and it was just this like, God is faithful. And I felt so comforted, unlike I've ever felt since or before. And I've held on to that. And I say it all the time. I say it with Azra, God is faithful. Because now I have her. And if I didn't go through that, then I wouldn't have met her, and we wouldn't have gotten married, and so on and so forth. But the message behind that, the lesson from that experience was I wasn't going to let go in that wrestling with him. I wasn't going to let go, even though I was torn between these two ideas. Do I just forget about all this stuff that he's showing me and just compromise and get married to this woman and be a part of this church that we were deeply rooted in, the Orthodox Church? And so it was, he was reminding me that you just stick with me, and I'm faithful. I'm not going to, forsake you and just, you have to give that up and give this up. But, oh, well, it's worth it. I'm faithful. And now here I am, and I couldn't be more blessed to be where I am in my life. And so just kind of combination of things between possible visitations of angels and clinging to him in the midst of a wrestling, even though I was so ready to give up.
Well, I'm glad you didn't. Beth has this little saying, it's something like this. It's that man's rejection is God's protection. Sometimes when we're rejected by certain people, things, situations, and it is hurtful and it causes a lot of angst, but it's sometimes it's God protecting us from something. I think I told this story a few weeks ago. And I had a relationship before I met Beth, and my mother prayed that away. And at the time, I thought, what are you doing? But I have Beth, and we've been together almost 40 years, and I can't imagine having lived this much of my life without her. God using her in my life to shape, and craft whatever this is. But yeah, that rejection that comes by the hands of men, is God's way of protecting us a lot of times.
Yeah.
So I'm very thankful. We're all thankful we're all thankful that everybody had to stop and get an ice cream or something, or whatever it was. All right. Anybody else?
Hello, Bill.
Hello, Kurt.
Now, on verse 32,
Where are we at?
in Genesis, when his name was changed,
Okay.
I thought occurred, could anyone but God change somebody's name?
As far as what the name means and all of its importance, no, I don't. I think
Change
God
it
gave
to
him that name.
Israel. Yeah, okay. All right. Via who he was wrestling with? Or
Well, as I said last week,
maybe we already covered this and I missed it.
yeah, you slept through it. I was
Yeah.
watching.
Yeah, busted. That's not true what he said.
I have always leaned toward the idea that this was somehow the Lord in some form, and that, he blesses him and he gives him that name. But I do find merit in the idea that before this encounter with the physical Esau, that there was this spiritual struggle going on. And I know in my own life, when I have been in a spiritual struggle, either with, my own flaws and warts and all those kinds of things, or whatever's going on in my life, that it is a spiritual battle. But in that spiritual battle, I can see God's purpose in it. I can see the Lord, so to speak, even though I might be struggling with this, that, and the other. So I think there is merit to the idea that there was this great struggle that was going on inside Jacob, around Jacob, and that in that he sees God's purposes. Now, going back to, what I said at the very beginning, what Stephen had brought up, along with some others in their discussion, is that it is possible. I'm not saying it was absolutely this way, but it is possible that if he was struggling with something other than the Lord, literally, that because he does not, capitulate, because he doesn't give up, because he doesn't roll over, that even an adversary would have to say, "You're Israel." Not that he named him Israel, but that he acknowledges that he is Israel. Right. Well, it's like Bilam, he can't curse what God has blessed. He has to bless. God has said to bless, therefore I have to bless. So I think there's merit to that, that notion, but I'm not going to be dogmatic and say that's exactly how it happened. Ultimately, though, the blessing comes from God. The name, the purpose, the call, all of those things come from God. But the adversary does have to acknowledge it when we're walking in that call. So we'll debate about this one until the kingdom too. Or we'll talk about it. We'll have a nice discussion. We won't have a debate. But no, I believe the title, the name, the function, the purpose, the blessing, that originates from God. It comes from God. Much to the, chagrin of the adversary. But even he's going to have to bow one day and acknowledge that Yeshua is Lord, right?
Yeah, I guess it brings up to me as I've gotten older, the idea of that, why do we have to have such a catharsis and a confrontation to come to these things? I think it's real hard for a Western mind to get around that because, like, we use the word joy, but most people are used to the word fun in our culture. And I think, like what Jeff said, it's almost embarrassing to come to yourself and realize that how weak you are in different areas, and yet in the Bible, it's to be an overcomer. I've just learned it's a much different thing than the things you have to overcome in life. Not much different, but on a different level. That
How so?
well, in my life, I've had to. I wouldn't say I was naturally talented, but things came to me kind of easier. And I didn't have to work that hard at things. I'm not that smart. I mean, intellectually, but I guess with sports and stuff like that. But with this walk around, you have to get it together. I think that's why I moved here, to be around more people that were taking it seriously. But in our culture, and I talk to people, everyone's they're cruising. They're not really thinking about anything. And it's just so dumb that, how everything's become. It's become just real stupid. People, I don't know what people are doing. It's very puzzling to me. I know what they're doing here, and I appreciate it. But it's you have to pick up on a lot of stuff. Just the whole idea of, he called them Israel. I never knew. I've been a believer most of my life. I didn't know what it meant to be Israel, how that component of my life. And I'll explain to people, you can't understand the Bible unless you know Israel. It's like when you do a jigsaw puzzle, you get the outside first. But that's what Israel is. If you don't understand that whole drama, I didn't hear anything about the southern and northern kingdom and Jeroboam, Rehoboam, and I realized I didn't know anything that seemed to be seminal anyway. So that's what I mean about what makes you come to that intellectually, and then moreover the things that come to you spiritually. But what spiritually has come to me is what a squirrel I am, not how great I am and seeing angels and everything, but the confrontation of the teshuvah, to change. But do I believe in him? But the big thing is, do I believe in him, that he's going to take care of these things? And that seemed to be what had happened to Israel, to Jacob. And it made me think of this, of what Jeff was saying, that there's something happens. Some things have happened to me like that. I didn't want to jump in front of a car, but maybe subconsciously I did, because of doing crazy stuff. But anyhow, I won't go on. But it's interesting.
I think, for me anyway, you realize you're a squirrel. Is that the word you used? Okay. I usually use the word slug, but it's because I'm trying to draw closer to him. I'm trying, and I'm, that commandment, I guess, is the right way to put it. When he says, "I'm holy, so you be holy," you strive to be like me, and in striving to be like him and to in some way replicate those attributes that he has that we can, that's when I realize I'm really a slug. I'm a worm. I think that's a biblical word, or your word, squirrel. But I also realize that this is what he's called me to do. And if he's called me to do it, then he's going to empower me to do it. And the struggle is going to be telling my flesh to sit down and be quiet, right? And to hush. And that's a really hard thing to do. And that's my biggest struggle. That's my adversary, is, the flesh that wants to say, wants to think, wants to do, wants to be like those people who are out there cruising. I think that was the word you used. The flesh wants to flee his presence. Is that what you mean? Yeah, of course it does, because it's uncomfortable. It's extremely uncomfortable. I don't like it. My flesh despises it. And, in whatever role we serve in the kingdom, anything that God has called us to do is going to require us to die to this will of ours, and that is a very uncomfortable thing. I'll stop there. I was going to say something to kind of take it back to something else I said, but I might save that for the end. Now, you don't have the microphone anymore, so hold on. Jeff, give him back the microphone.
Well, the thing that stands out to me is that Psalm 139:3, and the funny thing about it is because when you Beth and you kind of kibitz about stuff, and you said, I just feel like fleeing this whole thing. And she says, well, go ahead, but you good luck. It's not going to work. And then I was reading Psalms.
No, her exact words are, go ahead, be miserable.
Okay, it says in Psalm, in 139, Psalm 139, it says, thou compassest my path and my lying down, and art acquainted with all my ways. So he's got us coming and going, and yeah, I just forget that. Kind of
we
thing.
all do.
Yeah. I just like that psalm. I think it really kind of encompasses this thing where you really can't flee him.
No, there's this story about this guy who tried that one time. And he has a way of getting his way. Who was I sending it to? Yeah. So, no, I've tried it. Doesn't work. It doesn't work. Anyway, who has the microphone? Oh, you get. Well, have we got everybody who hasn't had a turn? Okay, if we don't have anybody else, that's fine. Go
Pastor
ahead.
Bill, just thinking of...
Wait a minute. What is this Pastor Bill stuff all of a sudden?
I'm going to affirm. I'm going to call you Israel. I'm going to call you Pastor Bill.
All right. Mr. Staff, go ahead.
All right. You made an allusion to, in this wrestling with Jacob and this angel or whoever, that if it wasn't God, then this entity or angel knew that Jacob was going to be Israel. So I'd like your comment. Could it be that when we, as Paul would say, come under hardship, come under oppression, that the enemy knows what God has for us, but we have to go through the battle to get it?
I misspoke earlier when I was talking about Daniel, that angel that delivered that message. It was the prince of Grecia that was coming. It was the prince of Persia that had contended with him. So I misspoke earlier. But why does that principality want to keep God's messenger from getting to Daniel? Because he's aware that something's going on. It's great. In this particular case, this great revelation is going to be given to Daniel. And this is a revelation that's going to be written down for the ages to come. All right. So yeah, I am absolutely convinced the adversary is smart enough to figure out that when there's a battle going on up here and God's on the move, that something big's getting ready to happen. And so, it is not to elevate our standing as a person or a family or a congregation. It's not the person, it's the purpose. Nevertheless, when God's getting ready to do something in my life and my family's life, and I can track this, right before it happens, there's always been hell on earth. Every single time. See there? I joined you, Nathaniel. Okay? Right. Well, James does, right? All right. But there are these huge battles because, yeah, I do believe the adversary realized he may not know everything. He may not know all the details, but I think he's intelligent and shrewd enough to realize something's going on, and he's going to do everything he can to stop it. In my life, in your life, this congregation's life, and what God is doing in the body, that's what he does. That's why he is the adversary. right? To oppose those things. And he comes to steal, he comes to kill, and he comes to destroy. And most of the time, the way he attempts to do that is through deception, through, sleight of hand and smoke and mirrors and a flanking maneuver. Never does he, typically anyway, confront us head on with things that he knows that we will not, concede to. But he's going to try to the evil report and all these different things because he wants to stop what God has intended. So then, if you are going through an incredible spiritual battle, and you know this is to be true in your heart is pure before God, that you have not done anything to bring this on yourself in terms of consequences of sin, and you find yourself in a huge battle. First of all, God's allowing it to happen for a particular reason, probably to see what's in our heart, to see what our response is going to be. I think this is the whole thing with Jacob and Laban in Syria. Laban's cheating, he's accusing, he's doing all these things, but the real issue here is, how is Jacob going to respond? Because is Jacob worthy to be called Israel? Is he going to be the kind of person that returns evil with evil, or is he going to be the kind of person that Messiah describes that we're to be? So when we find ourselves in these situations, I think our response is part of why God allows these things to happen. But I also believe it's because something is getting ready to take shape in our life that is orchestrated by our Father or in our family or in our congregation. And so when we're going through those things, we need to be able, as I put it last week, to peer through the dust and see what's actually the truth here and what God is doing. And I'm feeling a little Pentecostal right now, so you'll have to pardon me. But I tell you, before God, with fear of God, I tell you that that's what's going on right now. Something's on the other side, and the adversary doesn't want it to happen, and so he's stirring up a lot of dust. And unfortunately, some people, that's all they're going to see. But we need to be the kind of people that can see beyond that and see what God is doing and hold on through this struggle. And something will come of it for his purpose. All right. Remember I said this. No, remember I said this. We got time for one or two more. Who's got the microphone? Where are we at?
As I've been listening to the comments go through tonight, I'm hearing people say, like, holding on to his promises. And I was getting all excited because we had a worship team meeting earlier today, and that's kind of the theme that came up for this week's set. And sometimes we kind of are like starting from square one when we're like picking the songs, and it was like today we all it was all on the same page. And so I feel like that's really confirming what is being said. And also, I just personally have never really thought about actually wrestling for his promises and holding on to that. It's kind of a new thought to me that sometimes when we're going through trials and stuff, it's not because anything is necessarily bad. It's just because we need to be strengthened and we need to hold on to that truth. And that's part of our faithfulness to him. So I'm kind of excited I'm just excited.
Well, if you're excited, I'm really excited. Thank you, Sean. I appreciate that. One more. If we have anybody. Oh, yes, ma'am.
Hello. The talking thing. Oh my word.
You mean the bad talking thing? Okay.
In observant Judaism, it's like a no-go. It's evil speech. And in the past, recent past, after so much, it's like, and then I've reacted kind of like you're saying, But lately, I was reading where Michael, or what do you want to call him, was having a debate with the devil and about Moses' body, of all things. I mean, talk about, let's get an argument about Moses' body, you know. But instead of having accusation against him, he says, the Lord rebuke you, or
That's
something
right.
like that. So even the accuser, he wouldn't even accuse the accuser, you know? And so for us, to, like, whenever I hear toxic speech, it just makes, like, for instance, the leper or whatever, I think they call it leper, that it's like a physical manifestation of a spiritual, that it's like bad, evil speech. It's a physical manifestation of it. And whenever a leper is, it says if they spit on somebody, and if you're close enough to somebody talking like that, you're getting spit on. I feel unclean whenever, you know what I'm saying? I really do. And so it's like whenever someone is using evil speech around you, it's kind of like getting, you know what I'm saying, in a manner, getting you unclean as well.
Right.
Like you were saying about the other stuff. And, but, and that kind of crossing over on the subject as you were talking about the evil speech as far as the 12, oh, well, the part of the spies, 10 spies, right? I don't think necessarily that being scared of something is, I don't think that in itself, it's what you do with it. It should motivate. I think any type of emotion is a motivation for moving your body. It's just what direction is it going to be in. So if someone is scared with Jacob, his body still moved in the direction he was supposed to go in, but he did.
He did it scared.
Right, but he called on the source of strength and who you're supposed to go to. You go to your dad, you know, your daddy whenever you're scared or whoever, you know. There was another thing I wanted to say, but I don't know if it's okay. But I think it's interesting that our fathers, Abraham, Isaac, I think they did see angels often. And in scripturally, if you look in the Hebrew.
Genesis 18, when he was in the door of his tent.
Well, you see, whenever, like for instance, yes, that. But they'll go in and eat with him, but whenever they go to lie, they're like, no, you know, so he has like, you know. So I think that the walk does matter. So like they willingly go and after they split, right? They willingly go in and eat or whatever they do. I don't know, or him or what, you know, it's whoever there again, there's probably arguments on our debates or friendly talk or whatever. But I thought it was interesting around that time you were talking about Abimelech. I think it might have occurred twice to Sarah. Is that true?
Say that last part.
That where she got taken in by somebody?
Well, the first time was Pharaoh, right, in Egypt, and then Abimelech.
Right. Well, I thought it was interesting, a word that was used when I was looking at the time. It said by her word, they got some kind of, like their orifices shut or something. It says by, use the word. You know what I'm talking about?
They had a hard time, yes.
But it said, in the English it says because of Sarah, but in the Hebrew it uses the word word, because at the word, as though, but if you look in the commentary, it says she would tell the angel to strike, and it would. I thought that was interesting too, as though they could tell the angel to do this, that, or the other.
Well, like I said earlier, I'm not going to be dogmatic one way or the other. I mean, there are situations it seems that does happen, you know. I'm still stuck on orifice, but anyway.
Sorry.
No, it's fine. It's fine. You know, there's a lot of orifices that need to get shut up these days, right? All right. But I will, we'll kind of close on something that I think what you said was very important. It's not so much the emotion that's wrong, whether it's fear or what have you. It's what you do with it. I think that's a very good point, because I don't, it's hard for me to imagine that any combat soldier has gone into a battle careless about what's going to happen. I have to believe that in some way they're all scared. Some show it maybe in different ways, but they're all scared, but they do what they're supposed to do. They do their duty. And we're going to have to do that too. You know, there's a lot of scary things going on. There's a lot of things going on right now, you know, inside me. It's because I see myself, in a way, and it's hard for me to see that strength that we were talking about that comes from God. But you can't really experience that until you get into the battle. And then I think he bestows it upon us. All right? So thank you. Thank you for your comments.